Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Damage Report. I'm John Idarola, and today we got a big show. Not only in the topics we're going to be covering, but also the amount of guests that we're going to be fitting in just 1 hour. So we've got a little bit of updated news on the impeachment inquiry, a new witness, a new line of attack against that witness, but then we're going to move into 3 blocks of guests, starting off with Jordan Ewell, progressive activist and friend of the show. Is going to be joining us to break down some of the big news of the day, including effectively, what is the purpose of Fox Business? What are they pushing for? What are they attacking? And we've got them on why millennials are in the economic position that they're in. You'll be shocked to find out that it's not a structural thing that's affecting millennials. It's mostly up here. Let's see, we've got Trump's plan to steal Syria's oil, and we've got Nancy Pelosi announcing a pretty big, at least procedural change in how the impeachment inquiry is gonna go forward and what the right thinks about it. So we're gonna have that for you. Then we've got some on the Green New Deal. We've got a congressional candidate and Joe Biden and the relationship with Barack Obama. What's really going on there and what is not going on there, but Tucker Carlson thinks explains it. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun to close out the show. But before we get to all that, we're gonna start off with the impeachment inquiry, and the new witness appears. Donald Trump faces a new witness today. It is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman of the White House National Security Council, who apparently was concerned about what he was hearing on some of these phone calls, as it now seems everyone was, other than Donald Trump. So on Monday evening, the New York Times broke news that Vindman, the top Ukraine expert on the NSC, plans to testify on Tuesday that he directly heard Trump, quote, appeal to Ukraine's president to investigate one of his leading political rivals, a request the aide considered so damaging to American interests that he reported it to a superior, which is like a bombshell news headline, according to news headlines that declare it a bombshell. But from my point of view, it's like, okay, so he was on the phone call and he was concerned about it too. We've seen the phone call, I'm concerned about it. I don't need him to tell me to be concerned, I'm already concerned. We're all concerned, it's concerning. But anyway, it's another person who is going to testify that this was an issue. And there's a particular reason why it might be a little bit harder for the Republicans to discredit this one. The Times noted that Vindman's opening statement, quote, is full of references to duty and patriotism. And given his military service, he, quote, could be a more difficult witness to dismiss than his civilian counterparts. And that is, of course, because he served in the US military. He's a lieutenant colonel, that's a very high ranking position in our military. Additionally, he is a Purple Heart recipient because he was damaged by shrapnel from an IED in Iraq, which is just about as specifically a thing that protects you from criticisms from the supposedly pro-military Republican as anything, at least hypothetically. But it doesn't actually work out that way in practice, because despite the Times saying it's gonna be hard for them to discredit him considering his military service, the right has found a way. And so I wanna give you an idea of the ways that they've been attacking him just over the past 12 to 18 hours or so. So we start off with Laura Ingraham. Nobody should, but we're going to. Here is what she had to say about Vindman.
He's a decorated colonel, by the way, in the Iraq War. But because Colonel Vindman emigrated from Ukraine along with his family when he was a child and is fluent in Ukrainian and Russian, Ukrainian officials sought advice from him about how to deal with Mr. Giuliani, though they typically communicated in English. Now, wait a second, John. Here we have a US national security official who is advising Ukraine while working inside the White House, apparently against the president's interest, and usually they spoke in English.
Okay, so before we get into the actual substance of what she's saying there, or attempting to say, let's just note that to talk about the big foreign policy news of the day, she brings on a guy who tried to make the legal case for America torturing its enemies, and Alan Dershowitz, a guy who's any sense of respectability or duty to country above an individual politician he supports fled literally decades ago. It's a weird panel, let's just acknowledge that. But here's what she's saying is, he's a lieutenant colonel. That's gonna hurt us because we like to pretend that we support the military, but wait, he was born in Ukraine. And because he was born in Ukraine and speaks Ukrainian and is on the NSC and has long dealt with officials in Ukraine, they asked him for a bit of advice. And she apparently is trying to portray that as a disqualification. Note that she didn't say that he offered the advice or that he served as an advisor, just that they requested it on a very narrow subject. Don't have to worry about him anymore. Vindman, everything he says is a lie. His decades of service in the US military and inside US government, you can cast that aside now. And by the way, you might be able to find something that actually legitimately lets you cast those things aside. The idea, though, that a Ukrainian official asked him for advice when his job for a long time has been an expert on Ukraine and a person who works with Ukraine, that's not quite as surprising as Laura Ingraham tries to pretend that it is there. But here's the thing, it's one thing for Laura Ingraham to come up with a talking point, to try to establish a narrative. It's another thing for it to become effectively the go-to position for right-wingers in the media within just 12 hours or so. So here is Sean Duffy, the very similar argument.
When I asked you about Colonel Vindman, the very first thing you said was he was Ukrainian. So yes or no, do you trust Ambassador Bill Taylor more because he was born in the United States? Where does the location of his birth matter? Mark Meadows, who I think you agree with, was born in France. Is he pro-French by definition? That's a pretty stunning comment you made just there. And it's remarkable and notable given that Laura Ingraham last night in her apparent talking points brought it up as well.
So I read his statement, John, and I'm sure you did as well. And it seems very clear that he is incredibly concerned about Ukrainian defense. I don't know that he's concerned about American policy, but his main mission was to make sure that the Ukraine got those weapons. I understand that. We all have an affinity to our homeland where we came from. Like me, I'm sure that Vindman has the same affinity.
So look, he apparently his family's from Ireland or whatever. And so the host then asked him, so do you have more of an affinity for Ireland than America? And of course, Sean Duffy doesn't actually respond to that because he wants to assert that you can disregard this guy. He's not even getting into the whole they asked him for advice thing. He's just saying simply because this guy was born in Ukraine, we don't have to listen to anything that he says, which is a novel position, a new position for the right to take. I hadn't heard that before when it comes to countries like Ukraine. And so he says there that he's really worried about Ukrainian defense. I don't know if he worries about American policy. Like, again, simply because someone served in the military, I'm not Meghan McCain on The View this morning. I don't think that means that you're free from any criticism, but you have to explain why you're criticizing them. This guy served through the US military all the way to becoming a lieutenant colonel, was injured along the way, almost died when an IED exploded. And Sean Duffy thinks that he can just casually say, this guy cares more about Ukraine's defense than ours. He served in the US military. It's just a bizarre narrative. I don't know if it's gonna be successful, but I do know that this is the only tactic they have. And it's filtered all the way down to Fox and Friends as well. Here's Brian Kilmeade.
So if you look at this lieutenant colonel's background, he's got a Purple Heart. He got hit by an IED in Iraq. We also know he was born in the Soviet Union, emigrated with his family, young. He tends to feel simpatico with the Ukraine.
What the hell does that mean? He tends to feel simpatico with Ukraine. I have a feeling that prior to the news last night, more likely this morning, Brian Kilmeade knew about as much about Vindman as I did. And the idea that he can just casually say that, yeah, I've been tracking his career, and throughout his career, he's pretty much always sided with Ukraine. That's an interesting, bold position to take for Brian Kilmeade. Anyway, so this is all of them now. So they're all asserting that because this guy was born in Ukraine, you don't have to worry about him confirming the fact that he found it very concerning that Donald Trump wanted to withhold military aid for Ukraine until he got these investigations. Although again, I will point out that although sure, it's great to have another witness that apparently agrees with the whistleblower. And at this point, we've got loads of them. We can't even hold in our arms all the witnesses we've got that apparently were listening to these calls and we're very concerned about them. But I will point out once again, we don't need any more of them. Even if it's one who's much harder to dismiss in the way that they're trying to right now, we can all look at that transcript and we know exactly how bad it looks. And what's interesting, especially considering the tactic that they've used against Vindman, is as Aaron Rupar pointed out, Fox and Friends was doing a segment on an Army veteran and the true meaning of sacrifice about an hour after smearing a Purple Heart recipient who expressed concerns about Trump. So a little lack of self-awareness there. Donald Trump, he hasn't gotten into the specifically attacking him for being Ukrainian thing, but he did tweet this morning, why are people that I never even heard of testifying about the call? Just read the call transcript and the impeachment hoax is over. Ukraine spelled incorrectly, said no pressure. Well, look, I read the transcript and I don't think it's over. I'm very concerned about it too. But I will raise one other thing that I'm now concerned about. This guy Vindman is a top official on the National Security Council advising Trump in particular on Ukraine, a topic that Trump would have you believe he's very concerned about, and he doesn't know who he is? He doesn't know who Vindman is, a top official in the NSC? That is a bizarre That's a believable but a bizarre thing for a president to say. That should be concerning. Can you imagine if Obama said, oh, this lieutenant colonel that I've had countless meetings with, who the hell is that? I don't know. Fox News would be decimating him over that. But Trump, he gets to just casually pretend that he has no idea who he's working with on a day-to-day basis. Anyway, we will see what Vindman ends up saying. We're still waiting for that testimony, but we have a pretty good idea, and it certainly comports with what other people have said up until this point. Okay, we're gonna take a short break. When we come back, Jordan Yule's gonna be joining us to break down multiple news stories.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
If you're a millennial and you are struggling economically, Fox has got the answer for you. It's all in your head, man. Watch.
It's long been understood in sociology circles that the difference between being poor and poverty is the mindset about time. And if you are focused on this week or this month or even just this year, you are likely to be in a poverty situation for a very long time. The higher up you go, the income ladder, the higher the probability that people are not just thinking about my lifetime, but the next lifetime and maybe even the generation after that. And the real correlate between doing well is how far ahead you can look and take seriously. So my biggest concern with the millennial cohort is there doesn't seem to be a lot of long-term looking. Well, a lot of them think the world's going to end in 12 years. It ain't. And so they need to look beyond that in order to handle this wealth well and wisely.
And joining us now to discuss is the man who actually put me onto this topic in the first hand, Jordan Yule, friend of the show. Welcome back.
John, thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. So look, you're a millennial, right? Did you know that your lack of ability to plan for the future was why you are in the economic straits that you're in, Jordan?
No, John, that was news to me. I mean, I thought that was just being a first generation college student, someone who had to work their way through college with multiple jobs. Little did I know, if I just, put my mind to it, I would stand to inherit, my fair share of these trillions that are coming to the millennial generation, as they talked about. The thing that so there's a study that they pointed to in that clip, right? So they say, if you're focused on the immediate, like the next day or the next week, the next month, instead of the long term, you're more likely to be in a poverty situation. They framed this as the cause of people's poverty and people's impoverishment. This is so like immaterial and disconnected from the actual study. And what sociologists have found is that that's a result of being in poverty. Yeah, and I think that's important to point out.
Yeah, like, oh God. So like one of the only things that almost everyone knows about scientific analyses of this sort is that correlation does not equal causation, which some people take to mean that correlation doesn't mean anything, which is not true. But what it doesn't necessarily establish is the direction of causality. And so you have to actually use common sense and follow-up studies to decide which way the causal arrow is pointing. The idea that someone who's making minimum wage they're just thinking about today, man, and that's why, like, no, they have to because they don't have any money. They can't be putting away for a trip like, up and down the French coast or something. Anyway, that seems fairly obvious to me. I think I do want to show, because you mentioned this thing about the inheriting. Fox Business Panel suggests millennials should worry about inheriting wealth instead of climate change. So they point out, they say this new study, it's actually a 2018 study, that there's gonna be a bunch of inheritance that 45 million millennials will have. I ran the numbers, and when you divide it by 45 million on average, that doesn't work out too much. And of course, it's not being divided by average. Certain people are gonna inherit large amounts of money. The vast majority aren't going to inherit anything. And so I know that you have to watch a lot more Fox Business than I do. It appears to fit into this sort of narrative they have that it's all about spending habits, that the fact that wages haven't gone up, that healthcare and college are more expensive. They never acknowledge those things. It's all about, you're buying your avocado toast and stuff like that.
That's right. I mean, they're completely disconnected from reality. And ultimately, Fox Business, their purpose is to serve the interests of capital. The people who watch it are likely going to be way more wealthy than the average viewer. This is just something that appeals to them, makes them feel better about their decisions, their lifestyle, that kind of stuff. One thing I do want to point out is that this isn't just a millennial issue either. I know someone personally who is 60 years old, has been working hourly jobs for years, has to take another one at $11 an hour because their savings, what little savings they had, was wiped out in the financial crash in 2008. This isn't just a millennial issue, and it also, like you pointed out, the wealth is so vastly concentrated at the top, and it's not going to break out by average. It's going to be very, very little pieces for you and me. Like, we get crumbs while everyone else, old money just transfers. And in that clip also, they were also talking about how we need to keep the death tax dead. And this was shortly before, or the estate tax, because they didn't want any further taxation on that money. Mm-hmm. And this is how wealth continues to concentrate at the top.
Yeah, and so like pretending that their concern is about millennials inside of the same segment where they call for the end to the estate tax, that I noticed that. I don't know if everyone did, but that was funny. Also, I love the weird like mental tick where they say this is all about how the fact that the rich are thinking ahead, not only a week ahead or a year ahead, but literally generations ahead. And then they, like the woman who was speaking, she sort of gets, oh, wait a second, I know that like we're pretending that climate change isn't gonna wreck the world. And obviously this is a gigantic example of not looking ahead to future generations. So she had to go out of her way to say, oh, all the concerns about climate change are fake. And so I think we as a society should be planning ahead for future generations. I just don't think that Fox Business is doing a good example, a good version of it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's turn to a different topic, and this involves Trump had his change in approach to Syria, and depending on what day you're looking at, our troops have been pulled out or moved aside or they're still there. We don't really know, but we do know one thing, and it's that Donald Trump is very interested in getting one thing, not security assurances for the Kurds, but the oil. With him saying in an interview, the oil is, so valuable, it can help us because we should be able to take some also. He also said this weekend, we are leaving soldiers to secure the oil and we may have to fight for the oil. It's okay, maybe somebody else wants the oil, in which case they have a hell of a fight, but there's massive amounts of oil, which I'm sure he doesn't think about what he's actually saying there, but he's saying that our soldiers might literally fight and die to protect Syrian oil, and it's okay, he's fine with that.
Yeah, this is quintessential imperialism. At the end of the day, that's what this is. The people who enlisted in the military, whatever their motives, I'm sure none of them want to go over there, want to fight for oil, want to fight for a natural resource. They don't want to go and fight on the corporate interests of ExxonMobil. They're there for whatever motivation, whatever that may be. But to put people's lives on the line for something like oil is just so reckless. But also it underscores, prevailing foreign policy in the United States for the past few decades. This is so closely mirroring the situation in Iraq. Yeah. Chris Hedges wrote a column in the early 2000s, the former war correspondent for the New York Times. I was just rereading today to get ready for this, where he talked about the resentment that troops who were serving overseas had once they learned that the whole thing was a scam. Once they got over there and talked to their commanding officers about weapons of mass destruction and found out it was ultimately about oil. It was ultimately about corporate interests in the Middle East. It was this proxy war for Exxon, for oil companies in the United States. this is imperialism. But at the end of the day, we see people on Fox justifying it. We see people in the right wing defending it. 100%. Every step of the way, they are in lockstep.
Well, actually, Jordan, you're bringing up the Fox defense of it. So why don't we actually go to that, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So but let's quickly acknowledge, by the way, that stealing the oil from Syria is a war crime under both the US and international law. It's considered pillaging. You can't actually do it. But that doesn't stop Fox Business from supporting it, as you'll see in this clip.
The president's talking about making a deal with ExxonMobil to tap into Syrian oil reserves.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get more details on that. I mean, as we all watch the announcement and then the question and answer period, I think essentially what the president is saying, it's kind of crazy that we've spent trillions of dollars, that we lost all these amazing, valuable lives to protect a region of the world where the biggest asset is oil, and we never tap into it or we never use it to alleviate some of our economic pressure. How something like that will work, it remains to be.
He kind of threw it out there. He said perhaps we could make a deal with Exxon, one of our great American companies, to go in there and do this properly. So
right. And then he talked about spreading the wealth. In other words, it wouldn't be the United States is in the Middle East just to take the oil for ourselves. But I think the idea is to sort of alleviate the economic issues that come with policing that part of the world.
So let's put a fancy dress on imperialism and pretend that, first of all, that it's gonna benefit the American people, when it never will. It benefits the oil company that gets the oil. We don't get that oil. I don't get, like, in the mail a drum of oil that I get to put in my car. And two, that it's gonna benefit other governments in the region. I kind of doubt those two things. What do you think?
No, absolutely not. This is a proxy battle in Syria. Everyone is vying for influence and land gain and natural resources, access to the natural resources. But yeah, this Fox's secondary mission after defending the Republican Party and being a right-wing propaganda tool is to defend corporate interests. They're in lockstep with companies like Exxon. So of course they have like a dual interest in defending both ends of the spectrum here. Just as you mentioned, in this segment that this is a war crime, this is pillaging, and here's Fox defending it. I mean, whether it's waterboarding or stealing oil, Fox will defend it. They don't care. They have no conscience. And this is something that Trump has talked about for years. He talked about it with Iraq. There's countless tweets and comments from him on the record saying, the United States was stupid not to take Iraq's oil.
Yeah.
But this is just something he's been telegraphing for years, and he's finally doing it. I don't know why anyone would be surprised.
Yeah, and by the way, this should be just one more reason, one more encouraging reason to pass a Green New Deal. We don't need to go, have these wars abroad and imperialism and all of that when we won't be using the oil for anything. So that's another benefit we get there. Jordan, I want your just brief opinion on one more development in the news. For a couple of weeks now, the right has been saying on impeachment, I don't want to talk about the substance. I'm mad about the procedure. Nancy Pelosi was supposed to have this vote that the Constitution totally doesn't call for, but we're gonna pretend that it does. And so now we get to this week and Nancy Pelosi says she is going to hold the vote. House Democrats said Monday that the House will vote Thursday to formalize procedures for the next phase of the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Democrats said the move would ensure transparency and provide a clear path forward as the inquiry continues. So they have finally done what the right has been asking for. So it should be a day of bipartisanship. The right should be happy, right?
Yeah, but this is just, with what we saw with Fox, where they're pointing to al-Baghdadi. They're saying, wait a minute, you're calling for this vote now after Trump just did this for America. They took down the leader of ISIS. We have to acknowledge that the entire framework on the right is coming in bad faith. So they're worried about process. They're worried about access to the SCIF. They're worried about all these different things. They're worried about timing. It's all coming in bad faith. And as soon as, Pelosi meets those demands, whether intentionally or unintentionally, the goalposts are going to shift, because at the end of the day, it's about defending Trump. It's about stalling the process. It's about obfuscating the truth. They don't care about any of this. It's just defending Trump, defending the Republican Party, and pushing back against whatever the Democratic Party does in this effort.
Yeah, and again, they were calling for it literally up until the breaking news that al-Baghdadi had been killed. They'd been saying, how dare they not have a vote? They should have a vote. Oh, now it's just a distraction. And as you point out, and Trish Regan said exactly that. But let's also acknowledge that Trish Regan is not the only person who's not accepting this change. Lindsey Graham has been calling for this vote in response to the announcement that they'd have one. He said a vote now is a bit like unringing a bell. He he was just calling for it a day or two ago. Jim Jordan says, and again, he was involved in the protests. He says now it's like putting lipstick on a pig. So those goalposts, man, they are flying down the highway at 90 miles per hour. You just can't catch up to them.
Right. I mean, Lindsey Graham was a perfect example. He went from saying like, hey, if I saw something that constituted a quid pro quo, I'd be more open to the process. And then Mick Mulvaney has his press conference and says it was a quid pro quo. And then Lindsey Graham's like, I think this process is it's too obfuscated. They're not calling a formal inquiry. I'm just worried about the process. So she does. And then like you just said, and he's got a new problem with it. Nothing we can do will ever satisfy these people. They're just trying to obfuscate and delay and stall.
Yeah, and so for all elected Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, don't decide what to do based on ideas that you're somehow gonna win over Republicans, either elected ones or those in the media or the base. They don't care, and they're always going to change their views in response to what you do. Do what you're constitutionally required to do. If you believe an impeachable offense has been committed, it is on you to pursue impeachment.
Right.
Yeah. Jordan, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate your perspective, so thank you.
John, thank you for having me.
We're gonna take a short break. We come back a little bit more on the Green New Deal after this. If you're a supporter of the Green New Deal and you want to see it passed into law, it's obviously incredibly important that we have a president who's supportive of it, that we have senators and members of Congress who are supportive of it. But the effort should go deeper than that, all the way down to the state level. And we're joined now by a guest who's working to make that happen. Gabe Tobias, co-founder and national training director of the Movement School. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John, how you doing? Great to be here.
Great to have you here. And so you, in conjunction with some awesome groups, you've launched this initiative to try to raise money for state legislative candidates who support a Green New Deal. Can you give us the details about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a really exciting couple of weeks here. So Movement School, which came out of the AOC campaign, and it's a sister organization of Justice Democrats, just to position us in the left infrastructure, has been working with Data for Progress and Sunrise Movement to bring a huge amount of support to this slate of 20 candidates who are running in Virginia right now. These are state house and state senate candidates who are all running as unabashed progressives supporting the Green New Deal in this very, very vital election coming up next Tuesday, November 5th, with an opportunity to flip the state house and not just flip it blue, but flip it deep blue, to really show progressive values there and show how the Green New Deal can turn voters out, young voters, people of color, progressive voters out to the polls this year, and then obviously giving us a jump into next year as well.
I think you've definitely hit it at a great time. I think that it could be a great stimulus to people coming out to support these candidates. But I'm curious, what role do you see state legislators playing in trying to make either the entirety of the Green New Deal happen or working towards components of it? How does that play out at the state level?
Yeah, so I think the exciting part is seeing how the Green New Deal has really united groups from the grassroots all the way up to the national level. So obviously this started with Sunrise Movement and AOC last year at the federal level. But what we've seen since then is as advocacy groups allied with Sunrise Movement and others working at city level to pass municipal Green New Deals, working at state level to pass state level Green New Deals and similar. And that kind of leads into the federal. I think that the critical piece here is uniting the issue advocacy work and the real clear change that the Green New Deal can bring, whether it be jobs, environmental work, really pushing that kind of work forward, united with electoral efforts, right? To see this political shift away from fossil fuel industry, away from corporate cash in elections, towards a real populist message that the Green New Deal represents across the board.
So look, I'm obviously a big supporter of the Green New Deal. I would assume that it would be a big boost to a candidate, both in terms of popular fundraising from small dollar donors, but also in getting people to come out to support you. So I'm curious, in the case of these 20 candidates, have they found that when they're campaigning, when they're talking about this issue, is this something that at the more local level is stimulating a lot of interest in their elections?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the exciting thing, and I think this was the point that I think a lot of right wing folks and more corporate Democrats tried to make, that this Green New Deal was supposedly just something that could work in a deep blue district, right? They said, oh, this only works in the Bronx, this only works in in areas where the squad won. This wouldn't work anywhere else in the country. What we've seen is that's absolutely not the case. Polling from Data for Progress has shown how incredibly popular all the planks of the New Deal are across the country. So in Virginia, you're seeing 70-80% support among people for things like move to 100% clean energy, move away from fossil fuels, even carbon pricing has a super high percentage of support in Virginia. And what our candidates are seeing is that, particularly among younger voters, this is a really exciting message for them, right? Younger voters really feel the impact of the climate crisis coming in, and to have candidates coming out not just talking about sort of bread and butter issues, but really saying this is a moment where we have to be mobilized and be excited and take that not just to the street but to the polls as well. So we're looking forward to seeing that next week in Virginia.
And so I want to make sure that if people watching this are in Virginia and could potentially support one of these candidates, they know how to do that. So where can they go for more information about the candidates that are a part of this effort?
So we'll share along with this video and social media for Damage Report the link to the fundraising site that the For Progress has been running for this, where you can see the list of the 20 candidates and learn a lot more about each of them. And if you're in Virginia, please go out. Obviously, make sure you call your friends, neighbors, family to come out and vote next week. If you have the means to, please support these candidates, whether in Virginia or elsewhere. I think this can be a really exciting election, and I think what's really fantastic about the way that this partnership has come together is it really demonstrates what the face of the Democratic Party could look like in the future, and that's a great thing I think to have happen now, getting ready for next year. Everything that needs to happen there.
Awesome. And so if you're watching this, definitely follow Tobias on Twitter, follow at The Damage Report on Twitter, and you'll find information about this. Tobias, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this. I would love to have you back in the near future, by the way, to talk more broadly about the movement school. I find it a fascinating development coming out of, as you point out, the AOC campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you. We're gonna take a short break. We come back. A congressional candidate in New York is gonna be joining us. This is Pete Harrison. He's gonna tell us about his candidacy after this. New York's 12th district is important and notable for at least a couple of reasons. Politically, very interesting that it is in fact Donald Trump's home district, but also it's represented by a Democrat, incumbent Carolyn Maloney, who's held that seat for almost 3 decades. Interesting mishmash there. One other important fact about this district is that it faces a new primary challenger on the Democratic side. That is Pete Harrison, who joins us now on the Damage Report. Pete, welcome to the show.
Hey, John. How's it going? Glad to be back on the show.
Glad to have you here and to talk about the candidacy. So, look, as I pointed out in the intro, this is a pretty fascinating district. Real estate is obviously a big part of this. I mean, it's got Donald Trump living there, but also the incumbent has raised quite a bit of money from real estate interests in the area. So, tell me a little bit more about this campaign and how it's going.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll start right there that, Representative Maloney, as you mentioned, has been there for a very long time. And over those 26 years, she has taken a considerable amount of money from Wall Street and from real estate, notably including Donald Trump himself. She has backed the Amazon headquarters deal that was also part of the district in Long Island City, which at the end of it was just a real estate land grab. Mm-hmm. And finally, she is also a landlord. So, in a district that is over 70% renters, it's hard to see her as part of the solution because I think, frankly, she's part of the problem.
That's very interesting. Let's talk about that then. You say that she's not a part of the solution. She is a landlord. You, on the other hand, have a progressive housing plan. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think to start with, the two things that I often talk about with the affordable housing crisis are, first, it is not a local issue. Sorry, I got a phone call.
That's okay.
It is not a local issue. It is an issue that impacts virtually every part of the country. It looks differently in New York City and LA than it does in other rural parts of the country, but it's still the same housing insecurity that working class home renters and homeowners have to deal with. And the second thing is that the crisis is not just going to end on itself, because at the end of the day, it's not really a crisis about housing. It's a crisis about capitalism. Mm. The bottom line is that there's a ton of money to be made off of the housing crisis, whether it's big real estate developers like Related, corporate landlords like Blackstone, where I live, or extremist billionaires like Donald Trump. There's a ton of money to be made from housing insecurity, and they throw enough of that towards politicians at all levels to keep the status quo in place. So I think the solution to both of those problems are a national solution that talks about housing outside of the market. Mm-hmm. So that is why I'm really excited to be a part of and now running on the Homes Guarantee, because the Homes Guarantee does just that. And it's partly because it was written by impacted communities. So it tackles the really core issues of the housing crisis. And the first is economic inequality. We're going to build 12 million homes outside of the housing market so that it will be deeply affordable and permanently affordable. It deals with racial injustice. From redlining to gentrification today, the real estate market has been deeply racist. So the Homes Guarantee talks about ending racist bank lending. It talks about ending racist zoning. And it actually is going to give reparations for communities of color, particularly that have been displaced because of the housing crisis. And I think finally, the Homes Guarantee is actually, I think, a central part of this bigger transition into a Green New Deal economy that's making our cities and our towns more sustainable and resilient by building green housing, by investing in free public transportation and all these other resiliency measures. So it's a really, really exciting platform to be running on. And I'm hoping that, at least with parts of my efforts and others, that it's going to be up there with Medicare for All and the Green New Deal as part of the conversation this election cycle.
You know, I love the way that you explain the connection between the Green New Deal and your housing plan there, because I know some right-wingers say, well, why is everything in the Green New Deal? They're almost going out of their way to not understand the connections between these seemingly on the surface disparate areas of policy. But as you point out, there is a big link there. And I think we really live in an interesting time now, because as you just explained, the history of discrimination in housing, inequality in access to housing, it's particularly bad in LA and New York now, but this goes back decades and decades and decades. And yet now I feel like you hear a lot more national talk about it. I mean, Bernie Sanders has his plan. AOC at the big rally just a week or two ago, she talked quite a bit about access to housing. And so I think that you've really hit on an important time to focus on this in your candidacy. It's something that I think a lot of people are really thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been seen as this fundamentally local issue that the federal government doesn't have a role to play in it. And the inverse is true, that the federal government has created the grounds for this crisis. I was at the rally last week. It's actually in my district. And it was notable because it was across the street from Queensbridge Houses, which is the largest publicly owned development in the country. And that wasn't a coincidence. It's a fundamental part of AOC's housing plan, Bernie Sanders' housing plan, which I had the benefit of working on a little bit. It is about building sustainable housing outside of the speculative market. It's empowering local communities. It's empowering folks that are ultimately better at fighting for their homes and their communities than anybody else is. So I think centering housing as this bigger progressive agenda is a really winning strategy. And I think I mentioned this the previous time that I was on the show with you, but had home renters voted at the same percentage as home owners in 2016, Hillary Clinton would have won in a landslide. So this really is the Obama coalition that Democrats have not really been able to put back together. And I think having a really strong housing agenda, particularly centering renters, is that sort of missing link to rally the base.
You know, as you're describing it, I know that you're right, and it's interesting because that's the sort of issue that is so off like the front of the mind of most like mainstream political commentators. It's not something they talk about. They would never think about the distinction. I mean, I've heard a lot of like, this sort of voter goes this way, this goes the other way, but I've never thought about it, even myself as a renter, about the distinction between renters and homeowners. So very fascinating insight there. Pete Harrison, congressional candidate for the 12th district. Thank you once again for joining us, and just continuing good luck in your candidacy.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We're gonna take one last break here. When we come back, a little bit more on the Democratic primary, Joe Biden and his relationship with Barack Obama. He seeks to clarify our understanding of that there. Tucker Carlson seeks to do something different. We'll break it down after this.
Barack Obama has contempt for Joe Biden because for demographic reasons. He had contempt for him in the White House. Ask anyone around Biden. He was badly treated by the Obama people. No one ever talked about it, but that's real.
Did you catch that there? Tucker Carlson in, this little rant about how bad he feels for Joe Biden and how mean Obama was to him. Tucker Carlson did literally the only thing Tucker Carlson is there to do. He just, again, did a little bit of the effort, pushed white nationalism a little bit more into being totally normalized. Because he said there, Barack Obama has contempt for Joe Biden for demographic reasons. What demographic reasons do you think he's talking about there? He doesn't like how old Joe Biden is. He's not a fan of guys with white hair, people from that part of the country. No, he's just casually throwing into a comment and not having to back up or defend in any way. Barack Obama is such a racist against white people that he hates the man he chose to be his vice president. And I have to do this video, even though I have no interest in spending time on the damage report defending Joe Biden. But when this insane of an attack is launched against him, and really he's just the tool that's being used to attack Barack Obama and his legacy, that I feel obligated to. Look, Barack Obama might not feel the closest connection to Joe Biden. I would argue it doesn't matter and I don't care, but I don't think he's a racist against Joe Biden and secretly has just been dwelling in hatred for Joe Biden ever since he chose him to be his vice president. But that's Tucker Carlson. That's what the show is. They don't always talk explicitly about race, but the entire purpose of the show is to normalize white supremacy and white nationalism. And so I want you to bear that in mind in the future. When you see Tucker Carlson like segments, when it seems like he's trying to appeal in a very shallow way to your sense of perhaps progressive populism, or when he's bringing on guests that you might be predisposed to like, understand what he's doing. He is attempting to normalize white supremacy and he's using a variety of different tactics, a variety of different tools, and a variety of different guests to do that. It doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter what segment of the political spectrum they perhaps occupy. They're there because he believes they will serve the purpose of helping him to make that point. Now, Tucker Carlson aside, let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden. The reason that this came up is that, like earlier in the race, Joe Biden is talking explicitly once again about why he has not already been endorsed by Barack Obama, the guy that he obviously had a very long-standing, close working relationship with. The former vice president appeared on 60 Minutes this weekend, where he was asked by anchor Norah O'Donnell if Obama, who he served with for 8 years in the White House, offered to throw his full support behind the campaign. Joe responded by saying, "No, we didn't even get there. I asked him not to. He said, okay, I think it's better. I think he thinks it's better for me." Now look, I think reasonable people can take a look at that and come to a similar conclusion absent the racism from Tucker Carlson and say, I don't think that conversation happened the way that you're describing it. I just don't, and I don't think that I'm being unfair to Joe Biden, but I don't think that you asked the president not to endorse you. I mean, that's crazy. Like, you might have had a conversation about it and something might have been said, but you didn't say going into a packed Democratic primary, I don't want you to weigh in. I think it would hurt your reputation. I'm just worried about you, Obama. Don't think about me, think about yourself. I don't think that actually happened. It would obviously be a big help. Whether we agree on any particular issue with Barack Obama or not, Barack Obama is still very popular amongst Democratic primary voters. It would not hurt at all to have him on his side. Now, Biden went on to say, but if he ends up as the 2020 Democratic nominee, he said he had no doubt that Obama would be out there on the campaign trail for him. I have no doubt either. He's gonna campaign for whoever ends up being the candidate, whether he likes them or not. That's just a given. He doesn't want Donald Trump to remain in office, especially as Donald Trump is doing everything he can to pick apart every accomplishment that Barack Obama had during his presidency. He's gonna support whoever is running against him at that point. So that's not really a thing to say in your defense. And by the way, the fact that Obama is not explicitly endorsing Joe Biden, that might seem weird since he was his vice president for 8 years. But if you look back over the past 3 or 4 decades, it doesn't really stand out as bizarre. I mean, Al Gore didn't endorse Hillary Clinton. Now, he wasn't the president, but he was the standard bearer for the Democratic Party in that election. He didn't endorse him. Bush didn't do much campaigning for John McCain, which is perhaps understandable because Bush's approval rating was really, really low at that point, worse than Donald Trump's at this point. Bill Clinton endorsed Al Gore, but they didn't campaign much together. There was much made of the fact that Al Gore said that he was trying to differentiate himself from Bill Clinton. He was trying to set himself apart. And so the issue isn't that he didn't endorse him. That's historically appropriate, or at least to be expected. It's that Joe Biden wants the cred for being endorsed without the actual endorsement. That's why he keeps bringing him up. That's why, more than any other individual plan that Joe Biden has put forward, he has put forward the fact that Obama liked him and worked with him. That's like the key selling point that he is giving out, and that honestly a lot of his supporters seem to think is a reason to support him. That is much more of a problem. And I would say, look, don't go out of your way and make up stories that don't really seem true when it comes to the relationship that you had with him, the conversations that you had with him. Just stand on your own, come up with some actual policies. Lots of other people in the primary are doing it, and it seems to be working pretty well for them, Joe Biden. Okay, with that, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But thank you again for joining me throughout this show. Obviously, 3 guests is a big show, but I appreciate you sticking it out there. We got a lot more planned for the week, so I'll see you then. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Idarola. I'll see you soon.